Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about the work I do, you can check out my website, which I have posted down below this video. Also down below this video is a link that you can go to in order to get your nakshatras from your birth chart, that is. And again, you kind of want to look at your moon, your ascendant, and your sun, with the moon and the ascendant, in my opinion, being kind of the primary or the most important. So today's nakshatra is Dhanishta. I think I'm pronouncing that right. So Dhanishta is pretty interesting in that I found it very clear cut. I mean, the energy here really, to me, almost feels like it just comes down to a choice. It was almost like there's one choice that someone has to make in their life, and it's just like there's some sort of like pinnacle moment that arises in these folks' lives where they have to choose to either go down this like path towards density, deeper into the material plane, or they're going to move towards spirituality. And the reason I say that is that the planets that are associated with this, we've got a lot of Saturn energy because it's contained, half of this sign is in Capricorn and half of it is in Aquarius, both of which are ruled by Saturn, at least in traditional Vedic lore. So Tamasic energy is what we got going on here. And let me go ahead and explain that. So Tamasic energy is material focus. It goes into density, and it's all, the term that keeps getting used is inertia. I don't know that I get it. I mean, I know what they mean by inertia. It just means simply things move at a slower rate in terms of the vibration when we're looking at things that are connected to the material plane. And that, I guess it makes sense along those levels. But in this particular case, we're going to kind of look at Tamasic energy as being the negative mind. And that's how to best apply to Dhanishta. So when we have Tamasic energy and then we have Tamasic energy as an expression, and again, how you can read this is, so the ultimate impulse here with Dhanishta is sattvic energy, meaning clarity. It's harmonizing, and it's about balance. So clarity, harmony, balance. And it's not so much that sattvic energy is even an energy. It really has to do with like the positive and the negative of the universe kind of coming into its balance point. So both creation and destruction are coming into a balance point. So it's really a lot about equilibrium. So equilibrium, harmony, clarity as the deep vibe here. And again, it's spiritual. So a deep vibe of spirituality, which applies to the entire final third of the zodiac, going from Sagittarius to Pisces. So on the secondary level, we've got Tamasic energy. Now, Tamasic energy on a secondary level, what we're looking at here is more of a functional mind. And what I mean by functional mind, it's the part of the mind that we most readily engage. So in this particular case, it is the negative mind. The negative mind is fast, it's quick, it's impulsive, and it's about protecting. So now let's go ahead and look at the expression. So what's expressed, or what is end up ultimately how we flow out into the material plane, Dhanishta flows out, tamasically. So meaning it's focused on material things. Once again, it's focused on, going into density. So, and how these two energies combine, and they say that Dhanishta is ruled by Mars. So Mars is Tamasic and Tamasic, meaning that this energy is all about material things. And if you look at Mars, like what's Mars generally associated with? So on the negative side, Mars is associated with war. Mars is associated with aggression. Mars is associated, and I'm not saying this is negative, it's simply associated with sex. And again, so what we're seeing here is these are things that drive us deeper into sensuality, into material things, etc. It's essentially how we achieve things in life. So, like for instance, if you go to your birth chart, you find your Mars, like my Mars is in Gemini, which makes my activities kind of inconsistent. It's just how it is. So meaning my expression, it comes and it goes, and it's a bit moody and it's mutable. So that's how you kind of like interpret Mars in your birth chart, just I mean real generically. So what else, on a positive side, what else does Mars mean? So, well, before I get into that, think of Mars as kind of like the impulsive teenage boy, post-puberty, that is, you know. So like 16-year-old boy. The 16-year-old boy, again, kind of functioning on autopilot, is simply responding to stimulus as it rises, simply responding to what rises in the environment, and that's Dhanishta. A lot of the energy here is very, very much like simply responding to what rises. So there's a trial and error path built into this. However, they're doing it through Mars's more positive attributes, which are courage. Mars is also strength and devotion. So again, courage, strength, and devotion are all incredibly handy, assuming the individual has learned a shit ton of lessons. Now, because this sign is ruled by Saturn, ultimately, in terms of it being halfway in Capricorn and halfway in Aquarius, which means that it's all about trials. And ultimately, because the Aquarian energy comes in the latter half, it's also about nourishing one's environment. So it's trials and tribulations, progressing, learning from one's past, learning from one's errors in order to nourish and to feed one's environment. So nourishing and feeding one's environment could be the giving of knowledge, for instance. So the path is dharma. So mission oriented. That's kind of how I see dharma. These folks have a mission. You know, and it doesn't necessarily mean the mission is driven towards pleasurable things, although that could very well be part of, you know, what they're here to realize. But again, it's mission oriented. They have principled action as their motivating factor here. Now, the symbol of Dhanishta is the drum. And I've also saw bamboo flute. So what do you get with drums or bamboo flutes? Well, essentially you have a hollow instrument. A hollow instrument, like in the case of a drum, you have a tight skin wrapped over a hollow instrument, so it creates a reverberation. So the ultimate expression of Dhanishta, in terms of like, if these folks are like, you know, they have some incident that happens, some sort of situation where let's say their material prosperity is denied them, what ends up happening is that they're forced down a path to, I guess, truly find out what's valuable. And that's the influence of Saturn. Saturn has this energy that's going to bring about transformation. And people get all freaked out by Saturn because Saturn is kind of the harbinger of like pain, fear, and suffering. But Saturn is a spiritual planet. Saturn is here to progress us, and unfortunately, it's unavoidable. The material plane is all about pain, fear, and suffering. So those of you who want to remain permanently and perpetually stuck in positive mind, sorry, you're going to have things that are going to jar you loose. Now, the reason for this has to do with the fact that if you think in your own personal life, what are the situations that have really progressed you? Well, those are the things that kind of, you know, made you uncomfortable, you know, because we end up seeking solutions. We want solutions to those things that don't work for us. Largely, most of our lives are motivated by negative things. And I don't mean negative like bad. I simply mean it's, again, pain, fear, and suffering that we want to do away with. And because that's the natural impulse, that's kind of just what ends up happening. So the Saturnian energy, which is going to throw some roadblocks for these folks. Again, we have all this impulsive energy, this very driven energy. And it's, like I said, it's very strong energy here. Now, going back to this reference of a drum, so these folks can either beat their drum essentially for themselves, you know, meaning selfish. And if, you know, their chart is kind of all messy and it's kind of badly placed, this is what you might find. And I'll go ahead and read some of the characteristics if these folks are simply marching to the beat of their own drum. So it says, you know, what ends up happening is if they do not become a servant of the divine, which I'll get to that in a moment, of the more positive expression of the drum, what ends up happening is that, quote unquote, a devil is born. ruthless, inconsiderate, heartless, and self-aggrandizing. Yeah, pretty extreme words. So on the positive side of this, though, if these folks are like, oh, I'm creating all sorts of karmic chaos, because the problem is if they behave as the devil, what ends up happening is that it's going to bring frustration and tears, which is going to force them once again to reconsider their actions. This sign, Yogi Bhajan in the section for his meditation that's associated with Dhanishta, which is projection 7, the runner. I don't know why he calls it the runner. I haven't figured that out. But the one thing he did mention in there is that this is very much about one's past projection, meaning learning from one's lessons. Negative mind will pull you back into reflection on the past. So anytime you see Tamasic energy, particularly as this expression, you're going to see a lot of potential for reflection. So this drum as a positive symbol, what it really means is if Dhanishta, the energy itself, behaves as a drum. So I kind of think about it like this. So you've got this hollow instrument that we can either hit one way or another way. The thing is what we're trying to do is we're trying to surrender to spirit, and that's every single nakshatra, is attempting to surrender to spirit in some way, so we have this authentic path. Once these folks get attuned to that authentic path, that path becomes a narrowing process. So, and what I mean by a narrowing process, it has to do with essentially the disintegration of like a lot of the personality traits. It has to do with a lot of like being rid of selfishness. So selfishness, ego-focused kind of behaviors, etc., which are all very, very Martian. Like the thing is that again, there's the recognition over time, because Saturn's going to keep hitting these people with situations until they figure it out. They come to realize that the selfish path that they might have chosen, is not leading them to any sort of great deep satisfaction. So what they're learning to do is to allow spirit to fill them. They have to become free of personality BS in order to have this happen. They have to become essentially servants for the divine. And what ends up happening is once they allow their drum to resonate with spirit, allow it to vibrate with spirit, or in this, you can even look at it as a flute. If the song coming out of that flute is that which is, spirit, then what ends up happening is these individuals radiate life force. So very radiant, and the gods associated with this, and I have to admit I don't entirely understand the gods that are associated with this. There's 8 of them, and they're all called generically the Vasus, V-A-S-U-S. And again, how these are kind of described is that they are the gods of light, or the personification of cosmic energy. So the gods of light, or personification of cosmic energy, is the highest expression of Dhanishta. The positive expression of Dhanishta, outside of the radiation of life force, is this occult attainment. And when you see the word occult, sometimes the word occult gets this like negative connotation to it. But the way that I kind of perceive the word occult is hidden. So these folks may be drawn to hidden things. They could be drawn to, astrology, spirituality, any sort of spiritualization system, yoga, etc., etc. So you're going to see very, very, very powerful yogis with this placement. And again, the assumption here is that they can make that choice to either go into material density or to lighten things up and to move towards, which is their deep foundational base, their impersonal mind, their sort of background energy, which is that of clarity. So now if it's, it says here, I think light is kind of distorting my board here. We have the negative expression here, which is a deprivation of material resources. And I kind of talked about this before. the deprivation of material resources. Again, this is something that'll end up happening for these folks, but that's meant to transform them. Now, generally speaking, though, this sign is considered very affluent and prosperous. So this is not a sign which, again, I think I've talked about this with Shrivana, which is the previous one. This is not a sign necessarily like you're going to find these people like picking out of trash bins. This energy, it's very much about, again, the realization that the satisfaction has nothing to do with material things. However, they have the ability to attain those material things. So, like I said, a lot of times, I kind of think of Aquarian energy and sometimes Capricorn energy in some ways sort of similar to Scorpio, in that there's a minimalistic tendency or an austerity that ultimately ends up kind of driving these people's choices. So, I guess what I mean by that is that the idea of minimalism and the idea of reduction and austerity has to do with granting the individual clarity. So their internal psychological environment can be quite distorted if there's too much going on. You can't see, I guess, the light at the end of the tunnel if there's all this internal distortion, if there's all this internal craving, all this internal desire and this, you want all these things and stuff. You can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's why I kind of think of this along the lines of Scorpio energy, because to me I saw this a lot with I guess like Vishaka and Jeshta and some of the other Scorpio placements. About this is so once these folks make that choice to spiritualize, you get great spiritual teachers here. These folks are really radiant. A lot of light. So, if Dhanishta is indeed in your chart, I would ask you to, consider your path in life. Consider those things that have true meaning to you, the things that feed you on a deeper level, because the more that you, I guess, bring things into your life that are going to feed your soul, where your authentic self, your intuition, your instincts go, your gut instinct says, you're going to radiate. And when you radiate, you start attracting the things in life that bring you a true sense of prosperity. And, these folks are not necessarily going to be entirely materially deprived. They're going to be materially deprived until they figure it out. And then they start to attract those things in life, which is how the laws of attraction works. If you're tuned into what's authentic, you attract. If you're not, you're just going to, you attract always anyway, but whether or not you attract things that lead to your soul's growth or not, that all depends. So if you are not behaving authentically and you're behaving as the impulsive Martian, then what ends up happening is you attract obstacles. So something else about Dhanishta is there was a reference in Bepin Bahari's book, which is this amazing book. He uses so he talks about the positive expression of this energy and how these individuals can become very sympathetic, compassionate, and radiant. And he uses a really interesting, analogy. And he talks about, a crucifixion is necessary before divine light can be poured in. This idea that a crucifixion is necessary before divine light pours in kind of reminds me of the sort of, obviously we're some Christian biblical references here, but thinking about some of the books that I read, there were more occultist books, they talk about this idea that Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross at age 33 or something like that. Essentially the reference, and again I may not be correct on the age there, but the reference to age 33 has to do with the number of vertebrae in the spine, and the crucifixion is there's a crossover point inside the brain here. It's a nervous system crossover point, which basically is kind of like a cross, and it's near what they call the optic thalamus. So once this chemical reaction occurs, which requires a pressure. So this pressure, this internal pressure, this internal energy that brings about this into this divine light to fill these individuals, it requires certain austerities and also, again, sort of like disciplines. Ultimately, I like to think of efficiencies. So for instance, like overeating, like a sin, which means to fall short. Overeating or gluttony is like a sin because it requires energy, well, actually a lot of energy to get the energy from food. Eating is actually kind of an inefficient process in some ways. Alcohol destroys energy. All sorts of these different choices we make, worry and concern, and all the sins are essentially areas in which we fall short and destroy our potential for filling with light. And the yogis would say, even like, for instance, like sexual energy, is that if you discharge that energy, that sexual pressure that feels like horny, what ends up happening is that your energy collapses back down towards your root. So much about this filling with divine light and this expression of, I guess, compassion and sympathy and all these kinds of things, it requires that we be centered, meditative, surrendered, and ultimately making choices in life that increase our form's efficiencies, the internal pressures within, so that we can then be filled with light. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you how I've connected Dhanishta with Projection 7, the runner from Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. All right, so here we have Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. And so at the back of Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind, is how I made the connections to Dhanishta. So Dhanishta is said to have sattvic energy at its base. So what you do is, well, first off, this is a chart of the universal mind, or chitta. And what we're seeing here is the condensing of the elements from least solid to most solid, or least dense to most dense. So here we got sattvic energy at its base, or buddhi, and we follow this over to 3, the preserver, which is actually associated with the planet Saturn. And then we follow, so again, that's negative mind, so sattvic, tamasic, and then once again tamasic. And we've got deep memory of past projection, number 7, the runner. So what you do now is you flip through the book, you find, projection 7, the runner, deep memory of past projection, blah, 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 blah. And then the meditation, which is actually a breath practice with an internal mantra. It's done for 11 to 31 minutes. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this meditation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do the meditation associated with Dhanishta Nakshatra, which is called Projection 7, or the runner. So this particular exercise is, it's mainly a breath practice. But what we're going to be doing here is essentially kind of clearing the elements. Now, each of the elements, earth, air, fire, water, ether, all can be sort of cleared through the hands, specifically the fingertips. Now, how this is done, it has to do with concentration. It has to do with feeling and concentration. So the greater your concentration, and again, you have to kind of think about this along the lines of the expression of where your attention goes, energy flows. So if I concentrate on let's say my index finger here, and let's say I concentrate really, 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 really hard, and this is the air element, by the way. If I concentrate really, really, really hard on the tip of my finger, eventually energy will flow to that tip of that finger, and it'll start to pulse, or I'll feel heat. And again, but your concentration has to be really precise. So a big thing with Dhanishta really was about sort of purifying the psyche. And so the psyche is comprised of these elements and the baggage that we have attached to these elements. So this is one of the ways you can do this. Again, you're going to bring an intense focus to your fingertips on this exercise, as well as, again, there's a mental mantra. So the mental mantra is the highest the highest form of mantra. It's not verbal, is not the highest form, nor is a whisper. It's actually when you do a mantra in silence is considered the most pure or the most sattvic form of mantra. So the fingertips in this exercise are all going to be touching, forming quote-unquote ATP that we're going to hold at the level of the solar plexus. And so I'm angling my thumbs in towards my solar plexus. Now your solar plexus is, so my sternum is right here. I know you guys can't see it too well. My navel is here. So I tend to think of the solar plexus as that space between the navel and the sternum. So again, hands into that teepee. Very, very solid focus on the fingertips, feeling the fingertips intensely and concentrated in a deep, deep, deep concentrated way. So the breath pattern for this exercise is to purify the water element, which is one's emotion or energy in motion. So how we do this is, so typically it's an inhale through the nose, exhale out the mouth. So that's to purify the water element. It's an extended exhale, essentially. What we're going to do here is we're going to be breaking that exhale into 8 segments. And with each one of these 8 segments, you're going to be pulling in your belt line very gently. So when you pull it, and I mean that literally, you're going to have to exhale a little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, until you get to the 8th final little puff out. All the air will be out of the body. Your navel point, your belt line will be pulled in and slightly up towards your spine. So the breath, again, in summation, is inhale nose, exhale out the mouth in 8 segments, and again, pulling in the belt line on each, as you're exhaling each one of those segments. After you inhale, retain the breath. Let me go ahead and just show you. We're talking about all these details. So it goes like this. You're going to bring the eyes to the tip of the nose. So again, how I typically do this is you look up and to the left, inhale, retain the breath, roll your eyes up and to the right, retaining the breath, roll your eyes directly up, retaining the breath, then you exhale, bring the eyes down to the tip of the nose. You want to make sure that you feel stacked over your sort of sit bones to perineum area. And then you have a nice or a gentle neck lock. Again, hands level the solar plexus, all fingertips focused on and concentrated on touching. Breath is going to be inhale nose. Retain the breath for a 4 count, or sa, ta, na, ma. And then you're going to exhale out, pursed lips, and the exhale should come from the center part of the mouth. So you want to have your focus on the center part of the mouth, not the pursed lips. So once all the air is out, again, like I said, as you're exhaling each one of those segments, you're pulling in the belt line gently. So what you can do with the exhales is you can exhale out, because there's 8 segments, you can do 2 satanamas. So as you're exhaling, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma. Inhale, retain the breath for 4 count. Once again, sa, ta, na, ma. Exhale, pursed lips, sa, ta, na, ma, sa, ta, na, ma. And again, mental recitation of the mantra. And so you're going to do this for 11 to 31 minutes. And after 11, 31 minutes, inhale, retain the breath. So think about retaining the breath for 10 to 20 seconds. Exhale and relax. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I thank you for watching.